Hello and welcome to my Eye of Winter Occultist build. I will set the tree to the max level tree, that is CI, and I'll go over some of the basic defenses before I go over the offensive. This build is not a beginner build at all. You could use this POB as a template to make more beginner builds if you so choose to. That is up to you entirely. So to get this insane amount of defensive value out of being CI with relatively budget gear, the only exception being something like a Void Battery, Incandescent Heart, Sentrex, Snake Pit, and Bated Breath. I don't consider any 4 of these uniques to be expensive. I would only consider the Void Battery. A lot of this gear is just ES and like maybe a damage mod. Something like a Light of Lunaris, which will cost more than just a 300 ES shield. Well, maybe not cost more, but you can get different options to get different defensive values, like 17k armor with Flask active, which would be Basalt and Granite. But for the sake of argument, I'm just going to use a +1 level of all cold spell skill gems with whatever ES you can get. If it's 200, use 200. If it's 300, use 300. If you can get int on it, get int on it. If you can get aura reservation or whatever the fuck they've added to the game, get whatever the fuck makes you do more damage. I don't care. For a helmet, we have a 300 ES helm, and if you're looking at this saying, that's disgusting, how are you going to get a 300 ES helm super early into the league? Here's a 300 ES helm. Here's a 300 ES helm that works with Scourge mods. Here's a 300 ES helm that allows you to not even run Clarity and free up even more passive skill tree points for reservation. This helmet is quite literally disgusting for this build in this league, and I would recommend anyone that's considering playing this build to look out for this helmet, because this is one of the go-to ways to get ES armor, ES regen, all that kind of shit. Very, very powerful. But for the sake of argument, we're just going to use a 300 ES helmet. Incandescent Heart, this is one of 2 Saintly Chainmail bases that can drop in the game that are unique. The other one is the animated weapon chest. So they are rare value. However, I've personally seen at least one within the first week of a league every time I've played a league, so I have no doubt that I'll be able to get this in group found SSF. Group found SSF because I would say maybe about 100 to 200 people expected to join the private league, and I play in a small party, so we obviously will funnel anything that I would need, or the Aura bot, or the Curse bot, or anyone doing whatever that our group is doing. ES gloves, 180 ES. I would say that's probably going to be expected with the new base values to be league start friendly. Amulet, sea glass is not required. As you can tell, we have quite a bit of regen, and that's wall mapping. That's not going to be on bosses. Keep that in mind. But the sea glass, it's an option. Alternatively, you can just use something like the Pandemonious and just get Giga Dam for free. Well, not for free. You do lose ES and all that kind of comfort. Ring, just ES, res. The Snake Pit, the only other mandatory unique to make this build function other than the Incandescent Heart and Void Battery. Now, function as in be this tanky with Eye of Winter doing a ton of damage. That's the only caveat. Bated Breath is super common, everyone has them. One thing I would like to note is that the Sulfur Flask got the new 30% increased cast speed during Flask effect. This can actually roll up to 32. So this flask, or any flask, as long as it has 30% increased cast speed during Flask effect, is going to be very, very beneficial. This is almost having Onslaught, and the cast speed during Flask effect is almost a 40% multiplier once I have everything else enabled in this build. It's very, very, very strong. We have a Granite Flask with you need percent armor from something on your flasks as well, and then a Basalt. Basalt is not as required as the Granite, so if you need a different flask, go for it. You can drop Basalt, it will not make the build insanely squishy just by dropping with salt. And then a Sulfur Flask, you get Consecrated Ground. You also run Zealotry, so you can maintain Consecrated Ground that way. It also gives you just a flat 40% increased damage. Depending on whatever skill you want to use, instead of Eye of Winter, if you want to change the skill, you can use a different kind of flask in order to scale that kind of damage as well. Whatever it's called, Taste of Hate. That's what I was thinking of. If you want to use Taste of Hate and you're playing EK or BV, you can scale it that way. The skill tree, this is the level 90. Why is this 92 all of a sudden? Oh, it's because I took Frenzy Charge. I was messing around with that. Sorry, I'm slightly lying about my DPS. I don't know. So, we're going to go through the actual setup, Hydrosphere, and then Tornado Shot is just a marker to remember that Tornado exists. I have no idea if it's actually going to be better than a Hydrosphere. I highly doubt it. But it could be fun to mess around with. And then for our auras, I'm using Zealotry. If you're not running with a aura bot, just use Hatred. Hatred is very, very powerful. Then I have a Discipline, because if my aura bot were to die, or I'm leveling solo or playing solo for whatever reason, then I have Discipline. I also run a Clarity to help with any mana cost for me as well as the party. And then Herald of Ice for explosions to help with clear. You are an occultist, so you get the AoE from the power charges, and then you also get nearby enemies have negative 20% cold res on top of a multitude of other things that reduce cold res to about 60% value. And then I also have Frigid Wake, so Herald of Ice will help with clear immensely. Eye of Winter, linked with increased crit strike, inspiration, Peacock, Spell Echo. These are alternative leveling skill gems. However, the only one that is of any relative endgame scaling is added cold, depending on your crit strike chance and how comfortable you feel. If you're using Assassin's Mark, if you're using it's not Poacher's Mark, Sniper's Mark. I always get it mixed up. Depending on whatever the heck you're doing, that's all up to you. Now, another way to get crit chance and potentially drop increased crit strikes is to just use Frost Shield on bosses. Frost Shield works very, very well with this build in general, because you're already tanky, you're already running a VMS, you're already going to have either VMS or Molten Shell up, so you're just going to be tanky. Now, if you can't get enough strength to use VMS, then don't use it, but if you can't get enough strength for VMS, you're probably not going to have enough strength to use the Saintly Chainmail for Incandescent Heart. And this unique is pretty mandatory when you're CI. If you don't have that unique, I wouldn't recommend going CI, me personally. So like I said, Frost Shield, and then you can link it to Bone Chill, Arcane Surge, and Intensify. Frost Shield actually has a super high mana cost, so if you don't want to use Intensify, you don't have to. You can then drop your Arcane Surge down to a much lower level, but ideally you want to use at least something. You can use whatever is a lower mana multiplier to fit within your threshold, whatever you can do. You just want the mana cost to be as high as possible, that your build still functions, and that you can gain the benefits of being in Frost Shield. Now for your curses, you ideally want a Frostbite on hit, or a LE Weak on hit, and then you want Assassin's Mark or Sniper's Mark, depending on your DPS. Now I'm going to go into what I call the bullshit POB values. So this is going to be without any insane modifiers. So if I tick Proj Distance, people often tick this to bullshit their values because they don't understand how Eye of Winter works, and it's up to you to understand how Eye of Winter works. You kind of need a math degree in order to actually figure out how much % increased damage you're gaining off the final explosion. But I'm not going to activate that. What I will say is, based off of my knowledge of the skill, I'm going to get around 4 million Cyrus DPS with this gear by myself. That's it. It's going to scale much harder, and also that's granted if you actually know how to place Eye of Winter when you're solo on a boss. And if you're using Eye of Winter on a miner or whatever, the only thing that's going to scale your damage is the sheer amount of projectile scaling that you have, and then the off chance that like 3 or 4 of your mines don't actually just like completely whiff it to some random mob instead of going in the right direction, because they kind of don't have control over their own destination. So wherever the mob is, it doesn't always mean that that's where every single mine is going to throw their Eye of Winter. So Eye of Winter mines can either be very, very high DPS or very, very low DPS, and it's all based on the interactions of mines, the boss, and all of your damage multipliers. So be careful when anyone recommends Eye of Winter. Personally, I prefer self-cast because you can choose where the actual eye goes. Mines you can't, so the damage can fluctuate. You can do like 5 million DPS and then all of a sudden you're doing 50 million DPS. It's fucking stupid. For the passive skill tree, you can flex this to take whatever you want. You can play Orbistorm's Arc or Stormbrand while leveling. You can play Blade Vortex. You can scale this build into doing a pure cold Blade Vortex. You can scale this build into doing a Freeze Pulse. You can scale this build into doing Eye of Winter. You can scale this build and change it entirely direction and go cold or chaos dot. This is merely just leveling information to help you. Please understand that attributes are a requirement for this build, as you are attribute starved. Alternatively, if you really want something that I think would be a lot more fun than any of those skills, other than Eye of Winter, that being, would be the Ice Nova skill. So you cast Frostbolt, and then your Ice Nova will chain off of each Frostbolt. And with the new League mechanic, you can use Vol Ice Nova, and you can just plow through content. You have access to AoE with Final Repeat, and you want to use Spell Echo, you can get AoE on the tree, like Arcane Expanse. You can anoint AoE, or you can travel in here. You can change the skill tree to be whatever you need. If you want to drop Incandescent Heart and get a crit base chest, go low life, do whatever, you can change the skill tree into many, many, many ways. And for anyone watching towards the end of this video, please understand that Void Battery is actually a little bit easier to get, or at least I think it will be, in 3.16 due to Scourge League. And that is because of the Mythic Orb. The Mythic Orb allows you to chance Prophecy Wands essentially into a unique. We don't know what the ratio is. It could be like you have a 5% chance to get a unique or destroy the item. It could be like you have a 25% chance to get a unique or destroy the item. I don't know. So depending on those values, you may be able to get a corrupted Void Battery. And if you can get a corrupted Void Battery, then you can very easily make the Malachi's Vision swap. And this helmet gives you res, it gives you ES, as long as it's divined well before it's corrupted. It's a very, very, very powerful unique for this build. And please understand that the energy shield regen is going to fluctuate depending on whether or not you have Frost Shield ticked in the POB. I thought I'd mention that right before the video ends, because sometimes I forget to mention things that I probably should. Thank you for checking out this build guide.